Hello there, and welcome. Settle in. Let the day's worries drift away like little paper boats on a slow, sleepy river. Perhaps the gentle rain has begun to fall outside your window, a soft, percussive rhythm to accompany our journey tonight. We're here at Snooze-Worthy History for Sleep in the Rain, and tonight, oh tonight, we have a tale of toil that might just make your own bed feel like the most luxurious cloud in the heaven. We're drifting back, way back to the land of pharaohs and pyramids, to ancient Egypt, but we're not really here for the glittering gold of Tutankhamun or the enigmatic smile of the Sphinx, not directly anyway. No, we're going to get a little more granular. We're going to explore why hauling massive stones for an Egyptian pyramid was, to put it mildly, a sun-baked agony, and then some. You think your Monday morning commute is a trial? Imagine, if you will, that your job involves dragging multi-ton blocks of limestone under a sky that feels like a brazen, open furnace, day in, day out. Trust me, it's the kind of thing that makes mending fishing nets in Mesopotamia, as tedious as that undoubtedly was, seem like a rather pleasant spa day by comparison. So close your eyes, listen to the rain, and let's wander back to a time when building something monumental meant a truly monumental, and often quite miserable, effort for the thousands who labored under that ancient, unforgiving sun. There's no need to exert yourself. Just breathe and let the story gently carry you away. You stir, long before the sun has even thought about gracing the eastern horizon with its fiery presence. The air in your small mud brick hut is thick and still, carrying the lingering scent of sleep, stale bread, and the faint, ever-present aroma of dust and human proximity. It's cool, this pre-dawn moment, a fleeting reprieve before the day clamps down with its inevitable baking heat. Your dwelling isn't exactly spacious. You share it with several other men, their sleeping forms indistinct bundles on reed mats spread across the packed earth floor. Someone nearby coughs, a dry, rasping sound that seems to echo the parched landscape outside. Your own body protests as you move, a dull ache in your lower back, a stiffness in your shoulders, your hands feeling rough and chapped, already anticipating the chafe of coarse ropes. This is the daily reality, the unyielding rhythm of life in the workers' village, a sprawling settlement not far from the great construction site. You can almost hear the distant, mournful braying of a donkey. Or perhaps it's just the wind sighing through the narrow alleyways between the tightly packed houses. There's no gentle alarm clock here, no leisurely stretch and yawn. Soon, the overseer's horn will blare, a guttural command to rise, to face another day identical to the last and the one before that, and the one stretching out into a seemingly endless future. Breakfast is a simple affair. A chunk of coarse, slightly sour barley bread, maybe a raw onion for flavor, its sharp bite a small jolt to the senses. You might get a sip of weak, slightly sweet beer, more nutritious than truly intoxicating, but welcome nonetheless. There are no steaming cups of anything comforting, no quiet moments of reflection, just the grim, unspoken understanding of the monumental task that awaits. The monotony of it all can be a heavy cloak, a sense of dread that settles in your stomach, as predictable as the sunrise. Perhaps a cool breeze, like the distant memory of a forgotten rain shower, brushes your face for a fleeting moment as you step outside, but it's quickly swallowed by the dry air, a false promise in the face of the sun's impending dominion. The village is stirring, a low hum of activity, shadows moving in the dim light, the collective sigh of thousands preparing to offer up another day of their strength to the colossal undertaking that looms, even now unseen, in the growing light. The walk to the plateau is a daily pilgrimage of sorts, though one stripped of any spiritual uplift, replaced instead by a weary resignation. You join a slow-moving river of humanity, thousands of men shuffling along the dusty track that leads from the warren of your village, perhaps a place like Hayt el Ghurab, the lost city of the pyramid builders, as some call it now, towards the Giza Plateau, or whichever monumental construction site claims your labor. The dust, fine and pervasive, rises in clouds with every footfall, coating your skin, your simple linen kilt, already threadbare and stained with the grime of countless workdays. You might be barefoot, your soles toughened like old leather, or perhaps you wear simple sandals woven from reeds, offering scant protection against the sharp stones and hot ground that will soon bake under the ascending sun. The Great Pyramid, or the one you're currently toiling upon, begins to dominate the horizon, a vast man-made mountain, its geometric lines stark against the pale sky. It's a constant, silent reminder of the scale of your endeavor, a source of awe perhaps, but more pressingly, a symbol of the day's impending hardship. There's little conversation among your fellow travelers, just the occasional grunt, a shared glance of understanding that speaks volumes of the collective burden. There's no energy for pleasantries, no inclination for cheerful banter. The air is still relatively cool, but you can feel the promise of the sun's heat, a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a tightening in your chest as you anticipate the glare and the sweat that will soon be your constant companions. Your simple kilt, probably your only garment, does little to ward off the chill of the morning or the blaze of midday. It's functional, allowing for movement, but offers no comfort. The sheer scale of the operation becomes more apparent as you draw closer. The sprawling work areas, the stacks of materials, the distant figures already active, looking like ants from this vantage point. The thought of the day ahead, of the immense, unyielding weight of stone, settles upon you, as heavy as any block you'll be forced to move. It's an oppressive weight, this knowledge, this certainty of toil. There's a strange sort of camaraderie in this shared, silent trudge, a sense that you are all in this together, though that doesn't make the path any shorter or the day any less daunting. Each step is familiar, each rise and fall in the path, known intimately through endless repetition like a prayer wheel turning, but with no salvation at the end, only more labor. As you arrive at the sprawling worksite, the relative quiet of the commute gives way to a burgeoning cacophony. The air, already thick with dust, now carries the sharp tang of limestone grit, the ammonia-like scent of animal dung from the oxen and donkeys used for lighter transport, and the pervasive, inescapable odor of thousands of laboring, sweating bodies. This is where the true impersonality of your existence becomes starkly clear. You are one of many, a component in a vast, intricate machine. Overseers, identifiable by their slightly better attire, and the staffs or whips they carry, direct the flow of workers. Scribes seated at makeshift tables, their palettes and reed pens at the ready, meticulously record names and gang assignments. You find your group, your zay or tribe, a team of men you work with day in, day out. Your name, or perhaps a number assigned to you, is checked off a list, a papyrus scroll or a wooden board. There's a sense of rigid organization, a bureaucracy that ensures every pair of hands is accounted for, every ounce of effort directed towards the singular goal of raising the monument. your assignment for the day. It's almost certainly the same as yesterday, and the day before that, hauling stone. Perhaps today it's a slightly larger block or a slightly steeper section of the ramp, but the core task remains brutally, relentlessly consistent. You might be issued a length of coarse rope, its fibers already stiff with old sweat and grime, or you might be expected to use the one assigned to your team. There are no sophisticated tools for your specific job, just the rope, your own straining muscles, and the unyielding determination born of necessity. The sun, now climbing higher, begins to assert its dominance, its rays bouncing off the pale stone surfaces, creating a harsh glare. Finding even a sliver of shade is a fleeting dream, a luxury you won't be afforded once the real work begins. The noise level rises steadily. The rhythmic clang of hammers on chisels from the quarrymen, the grating sound of stone being dressed, the shouts of foremen, the creak and groan of ropes under immense tension, the lowing of oxen, the distant rhythmic chanting of other hauling gangs. It's a symphony of drudgery, a soundscape of relentless effort. And then there's the psychological weight. You see the massive blocks, freshly quarried or already shaped, waiting on their sledges. Each one represents hours, perhaps days, of agonizing effort for a team of men like yours, and it's just one of thousands upon thousands that make up the pyramid. The sheer immensity of it can feel crushing, a silent testament to the endless labor that lies ahead, stretching out under that increasingly hot, unforgiving sky. The journey of a pyramid stone often begins in the limestone quarries, vast sun-drenched scars upon the landscape, sometimes close to the pyramid site, like the local Giza quarries, or further afield for the fine white Tura limestone used for the outer casing, which had to be ferried across the Nile. If you're not a hauler today, perhaps you're one of the unfortunates condemned to the quarry. Imagine the scene. A wide open pit reflecting the sun's glare with blinding intensity from the freshly cut pale stone surfaces. The air is perpetually choked with a fine, white dust that coats everything, settling on your skin, in your hair, in your lungs with every breath. The noise is relentless. The percussive chip-chip-chip of copper chisels against stone, the dull thud of heavy dolerite pounders, the grating sound of sand used as an abrasive. Copper tools, you see, weren't exactly the pinnacle of durability, especially against rock. They blunted quickly, requiring constant resharpening, which meant a whole other team of workers was dedicated just to keeping the quarrymen supplied with tools that could, at least for a short while, bite into the stone. The process of extracting a block was painfully laborious. First, quarrymen would mark out the desired dimensions on the rock face. Then, using those soft copper chisels and hard stone pounders, they would painstakingly cut deep channels around the block. This wasn't delicate work. It was brutal, repetitive smashing and chipping, hour after hour, under that baking sun. Once the channels were deep enough, they would insert wooden wedges into drilled holes or existing fissures along the base. Then they'd pour water onto the wedges. The wood would swell, exerting immense pressure, and with a groan and a crack, if you were lucky, the massive block would split from the bedrock. It sounds straightforward, but imagine the sheer physical effort, the sweat, the aching muscles, the endless repetition required for just one of these behemoths. Injuries were, as you might expect, depressingly common. A misplaced swing of a pounder could mean crushed fingers. A prematurely splitting block could trap a limb. Heat stroke was a constant companion, lurking in the shimmering air. First aid, if available, would be rudimentary: a poultice of herbs, a binding of cloth, perhaps some incantation from a lector priest if the injury was severe. The overseers, ever present, patrolled the quarry, their voices harsh, urging the men on, sometimes with threats, sometimes with the crack of a whip, ensuring the pace never slackened. The sun climbed, the dust swirled, the tools bit slowly into the unyielding stone, and the cycle of exertion continued, day in, day out, a testament to human endurance in the face of a truly monumental and frankly miserable task. Once a block, weighing several tons, perhaps 2.5 for an average core block, but sometimes much, much more, was finally prized free from the quarry face, it was far from ready for its journey to the pyramid. It lay there, a colossal rough-hewn beast, and the next agonizing step was to maneuver it onto a heavy wooden sled. This was a feat of brute force, some cunning leverage and terrifying risk. Imagine your team, or another like it, gathered around this mountain of stone. You'd have thick wooden levers, perhaps some rollers, though their use is debated for the truly massive blocks. The air would be thick with shouted commands, grunts of exertion, and the ever-watchful eyes of the overseer. You'd wedge your levers under one edge of the block, your muscles screaming in protest as you and your comrades put your entire weight into it, trying to lift it just enough, just a few precious inches, to slide the heavy wooden sled underneath. The wood of the sled itself was precious, often imported cedar or fir, strong and durable, but still just wood against tons of stone. The ropes, thick and coarse, made from papyrus fibers or palm fronds, would be looped around the block or attached to the sled once the block was precariously perched. These ropes would cut into your already calloused hands, leaving them raw and bleeding despite the toughness of your skin. The immense dead weight of the stone felt absolute, a force of nature you were pitted against. The ground beneath your feet would be uneven, a mixture of rock debris and compacted dust, offering treacherous footing. A slip, a moment of lost coordination, could be disastrous. If that block started to shift uncontrollably, it could crush limbs or worse. The shouting would intensify, the overseer's voice a rasping goad. "Heave! Heave, you sons of jackals! Put your backs into it, and you would heave, every sinew straining, your breath coming in ragged gasps, the sun beating down mercilessly on your exposed back and neck. There might be a collective groan, a desperate surge of energy, and then, with an earth-shuddering thud, the stone would lurch and settle onto the sled. That brief, almost imperceptible moment of success, the stone finally tamed, was immediately overshadowed by the dawning, or rather, the continuing dread of the next phase, hauling it. For now, it was merely transferred from one state of immobility to another, slightly more portable state of immobility. The relief was momentary, quickly replaced by the weary anticipation of the long, slow drag that awaited. Now, the ancient Egyptians, for all their back-breaking labor, weren't entirely without a grasp of basic physics. They understood, at least empirically, the concept of friction and the rather pressing need to reduce it when trying to persuade several tons of uncooperative limestone to go on a journey. This is where the water-bearers and the path-wetters came in, a small but crucial part of this grand, agonizing procession. Often, these were younger boys, not yet strong enough for the heaviest hauling, or perhaps older men, their bodies too worn for the primary pulling teams. You'd see them scurrying back and forth, like busy ants carrying heavy clay pots filled with water, likely drawn from the Nile or nearby canals. Their task, which must have seemed endless, was to walk just ahead of the sledge, pouring a steady stream of water onto the packed earth or sand directly in front of its runner. You'd hear the sizzle as the cool water hit the sun-baked ground, a momentary hiss before it was absorbed, leaving a dark, damp patch. Did it really help that much? Well, modern experiments suggest that wetting sand in just the right way can indeed significantly reduce the pulling force required, perhaps by as much as half. So, yes, it likely made a tangible difference, transforming the task from utterly impossible to merely heroically difficult. But standing there, covered in dust, muscles already trembling with fatigue, watching that small trickle of water, it might have felt like a pitifully inadequate gesture against the sheer inertia of the stone. The sun, of course, did its best to negate their efforts, its relentless heat quickly drying the dampened path, requiring constant reapplication. The water-bearers themselves were engaged in their own form of Sisyphean toil, an endless circuit of filling, carrying, and pouring, their small bodies straining under the weight of the water jars. Dehydration was a constant threat for everyone on the site, from the mightiest hauler to the smallest water boy. The water they poured on the path was precious, but the water needed to sustain the workforce was even more so. This small repetitive act of wetting the path, this tiny ritual in the grand grinding pageant of labor, became part of the rhythm of the haul. It was as regular and monotonous as the lapping of waves against a shore, or, if you were to close your eyes and just listen, perhaps like the gentle, persistent fall of rain on a thirsty roof. A sound that promised relief, but, in this context, only heralded more effort under that blazing, indifferent sky. And so, the great haul begins, the true test of endurance, the epitome of sun-baked agony. You are part of a team, a gang, perhaps 20 strong for an average block, maybe many more. Some estimates go up to 100 or more for the truly colossal granite blocks used in the king's chamber, which had to be brought all the way from Aswan, hundreds of miles upriver. For now, let's imagine you're dealing with a standard multi-ton limestone block from a local quarry. Thick, heavy ropes are attached to the front of the wooden sledge. These aren't soft, pliable ropes. They are coarse, stiff, and unforgiving, made from papyrus or palm fibers, designed for strength, not comfort. You and your comrades take your positions, two long lines of men leaning into the ropes, which dig cruelly into your shoulders and across your chests, or grip them with raw, calloused hands. An overseer, perhaps standing on the block itself or walking alongside, gives the signal, a guttural shout, the rhythmic beat of a drum or clapper, or a synchronized chant that the workers themselves might have developed, a way to unify their effort to find a rhythm in the pain. Hoo up, hoo up. The sound echoes across the barren landscape. Then the coordinated strain. Every muscle in your body tenses, from your legs digging into the sandy, uneven ground for purchase, to your back and arms pulling with all your might. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happens. The stone remains stubbornly, impossibly immobile. Then, with a collective groan that seems to emanate from the very earth, the sledge grudgingly begins to move. It's a slow, almost imperceptible movement at first, an agonizing crawl. You celebrate inches, not feet. The sun, your relentless, fiery tormentor, beats down without mercy. There is no shade, no respite from its glare. Sweat pours from you, stinging your eyes, soaking your meager kilt, carving rivulets through the layers of dust caked on your skin. The dust itself is a constant torment, kicked up by dozens of shuffling, straining feet and the grating passage of the sledge. It clogs your nostrils, coats your tongue, makes every breath a gritty effort. The rhythm of the work is mind-numbing, brutally simple. Pull, strain, gasp for breath, gain an inch, rest for a fleeting second, just enough to shift your footing, to wipe a sliver of sweat from your brow with a filthy forearm. Then the signal comes again, and you pull. For hours, this is your world. The rope, the stone, the sun, the dust, the pain. It's a focused, tunnel vision existence where the only reality is the next heave, the next agonizing inch forward. Your path is not always flat. Indeed, to get the stones to the higher levels of the ever-growing pyramid, you must ascend the ramp. These weren't dainty little inclines. They were monumental constructions in themselves, massive banks of earth, rubble, and limestone chippings, perhaps coated with a layer of Nile mud that, when dry, formed a relatively hard surface. Some might have been straight, running directly up one face of the pyramid. Others might have zigzagged or even spiraled around the structure. Whatever its form, this ramp was your unforgiving ascent, the gradient seemingly slight to the casual eye, but a monstrous, muscle-shredding challenge when you're part of a human locomotive trying to drag several tons of dead weight uphill. The surface, even if carefully prepared, was never perfectly smooth. Small stones, loose patches of earth, ruts from previous passages, all conspired to make the footing treacherous and the pulling even harder. Each upward step required an extra surge of effort, a deeper burn in your thighs and calves, and the higher you went on the ramp, the more exposed you were to the wind, which could be a blessing if it carried a hint of coolness, but a curse if it whipped more sand and dust into your face. The pyramid itself loomed ever larger, beside you or ahead of you, a silent geometric giant that seemed to consume your efforts with insatiable hunger. Your progress felt infinitesimally small against its colossal scale. You might toil for an entire morning to move a single block a few hundred feet up this incline. The psychological toll was immense. The top of the ramp always seemed to recede, an ever-distant goal. One of the ever-present fears was the terrifying possibility of the sledge slipping backward. If the team lost momentum, if the ropes slackened for even a moment on a steeper section, the massive stone could begin to slide, gaining speed with terrifying rapidity, threatening to crush anyone in its path. The shouts of the overseers would become frantic, desperate, urging men to hold fast, to dig in their heels, to prevent disaster. The sheer, mind-numbing repetition of the task was perhaps its most soul-destroying aspect. Each pull was almost identical to the last, each step on the ramp an echo of the one before. It was a rhythm of suffering, a cadence of exhaustion. Just like the steady, persistent fall of rain, your steps were rhythmic, inevitable, and leading to a very, very slow soaking of your energy, draining you bit by bit until only a husk of willpower remained. And still, the ramp stretched upwards, towards that blazing, indifferent sky. Sustaining this level of superhuman effort, day after grueling day, required fuel, however meager. Breaks during the actual hauling process were short, precious, and infrequent, just enough to catch your breath and prepare for the next agonizing pull. Water, however, was crucial, a matter of life and death under the searing Egyptian sun. Water bearers, as mentioned, not only wetted the path but also circulated among the work gangs, offering sips of lukewarm, slightly gritty water from porous clay jars. That water, tasting of earth and clay, was the most precious liquid in the world at that moment, a fleeting relief to a parched throat. When a more substantial break was finally called, perhaps at midday when the sun was at its most ferocious, food would be distributed. Don't imagine a leisurely lunch break with varied options. Your rations were basic, designed for sustenance, not pleasure. The staple was bread, a coarse, dense loaf made from emmer wheat or barley, probably gritty from the sand that inevitably found its way into the grinding process. Alongside this, you might get a handful of dried fish, salty and tough, providing much-needed protein. Onions and garlic were common. Eaten raw, their pungent bite a sharp contrast to the blandness of the bread. These were believed to have health-giving properties, and certainly they added some flavor to an otherwise monotonous diet. Perhaps some radishes, lentils, or other common vegetables, depending on the season and availability. This food was often consumed quickly, right there on the worksite, amidst the dust and grime, while you sat, or more likely squatted, trying to gather your strength for the afternoon's labor. There were no dedicated dining areas for the hauling gangs, no comfortable seating. You ate with hands still caked with dirt and the sticky residue of the ropes. And then there was the beer. Egyptian beer, or henket, was a thick, nutritious, and mildly alcoholic brew, often made from barley bread crumbled into water and allowed to ferment. It was a vital part of the daily ration, safer to drink than potentially contaminated river water, and providing valuable calories and B vitamin. It wasn't the strong, intoxicating beverage we might think of today, but rather a kind of liquid bread. Yet, even with these rations, a gnawing hunger and a persistent thirst were your constant companions, barely kept at bay. It was a cruel irony to be toiling so brutally in this fertile land, the gift of the Nile, whose annual inundation brought such abundance, while your own sustenance was so basic, so relentlessly unchanging, just enough to keep the human engine from sputtering to a complete halt. Now, while the image of thousands of men hauling stones is powerful and largely accurate for the sheer muscle required, it's important to remember that a project of this magnitude involved a wide array of skills and tasks. The "and more" in our story title definitely includes these other, perhaps slightly less agonizing, but still essential roles. Not everyone was condemned to the ropes and the ramps. There were the skilled craftsmen whose lives, while still hard, probably offered a bit more variation and perhaps a touch more status. Stone masons, for instance, were crucial. Once the rough blocks arrived from the quarry, these men, using copper chisels, wooden mallets, and plumb bobs, would meticulously dress the stones, shaping them to fit precisely with their neighbors in the pyramid's structure. For the fine, white Tura limestone casing stones that would form the smooth, gleaming outer layer of the pyramid, this work had to be incredibly precise. You can imagine them, perhaps working in a slightly more sheltered area, the tap-tap-tap of their tools a constant rhythmic counterpoint to the grunts and shouts of the haulers. Then there were the carpenters, indispensable for an operation that relied so heavily on wooden, sledges, levers, rollers, and perhaps even scaffolding. The smell of wood, cedar, acacia, sycamore fig would have mingled with the stone dust. These men were constantly building new equipment and, just as importantly, repairing the old. Sledges splintered under the immense loads, levers snapped, ropes frayed. Their skills kept the whole logistical chain moving. And what about the tools themselves? Those copper chisels and drills used by the masons and quarrymen, blunted with frustrating speed against the hard stone. So there was a constant demand for metallurgists and toolmakers, smiths who would melt and recast copper, and sharpeners who would painstakingly restore an edge to a worn-out tool, perhaps using sandstone grinders. Their forges would have glowed, adding another source of heat to the already baking environment. And of course, there were the scribes, the literate elite of the workforce, armed with their reed pens, ink palettes, and rolls of papyrus. They were the record keepers, the accountants, the surveyors. They measured stone blocks, calculated angles and volumes, kept track of work gangs, and recorded the distribution of ration. Theirs was a position of relative comfort, perhaps even wielding a degree of authority, sheltered from the worst of the sun and physical strain. Yet they too were cogs in this immense pyramid-building machine, their careful calculations as vital as the hauler's brawn. Their work, though different, was still demanding, requiring precision and concentration amidst the organized chaos, ensuring that this colossal puzzle of stone came together as planned. Life for these thousands of workers, haulers, and craftsmen alike didn't end when they dropped their ropes or tools. Most of them lived in specially constructed settlements near the pyramid sites, cities built to house and support the massive workforce. Places like Haid el-Ghurab at Giza, sometimes called the lost city of the pyramid builders, have revealed fascinating details about their daily existence, painting a picture far more complex than just mud huts and misery. This wasn't just a temporary camp, it was an organized town. You'd find sprawling bakeries with rows of bread molds, working day and night to produce the thousands of loaves required daily to feed the workers. The aroma of baking bread, that staple of the Egyptian diet, must have been a constant presence, a reminder of the sustenance that fueled their incredible labor. Alongside the bakeries, there would be breweries, equally busy producing the vast quantities of weak, nutritious beer that formed a core part of the workers' rations. Imagine the logistics, grinding the grain, preparing the mash, tending the fermentation, all on an industrial scale for the ancient world. The living quarters themselves were often long gallery-like structures, essentially barracks, which could house dozens of men from the same work gang. These were simple, yes, mud brick walls, packed earth floors, perhaps a small hearth for warmth on cooler nights, but they provided shelter. There's evidence of segregation too, with different areas for the skilled artisans and the general laborers, perhaps reflecting a social hierarchy within the workforce. Remarkably, these workers' cities also show evidence of organized medical care. Archaeologists have found skeletons with healed fractures, amputations that had been cared for, and even signs of brain surgery. Clearly, there was an understanding that a healthy worker was a productive worker, and efforts were made to patch up the injured and get them back to the job, or at least to ensure they survived. It wasn't a compassionate modern hospital, but it was a pragmatic system for maintaining the workforce. What about social life? After a day of crushing labor, energy for revelry must have been scarce. Yet, humans are social creatures. Perhaps in the evenings, gathered around a shared meal, there was some storytelling, some singing, the playing of simple reed flutes, or maybe just the quiet murmur of conversation, the sharing of complaints, the weary camaraderie of men bound by a common, grueling experience. Always the shadow of the pyramid project loomed over the village, dominating not just the skyline but every aspect of life. a constant reminder of their purpose, their toil, and perhaps their tiny expendable place in the grand scheme of the Pharaoh's eternal glory. The end of a workday, if you were lucky enough to make it through without serious mishap, was heralded not by a clock or a whistle, but by the sun dipping towards the western horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a beautiful sight perhaps utterly wasted on eyes too weary to appreciate it. As the light faded, the overseers would finally call a halt to the day's main labor. For you, the stone hauler, this meant the blessed release of the ropes from your aching shoulders, the permission to straighten your protesting back. The trudge back to the workers' village was a slow, exhausted shuffle, each step an effort. The camaraderie of the morning commute was replaced by a profound, bone-deep weariness. There was little talk, just the sound of thousands of tired feet on the dusty path, a collective sigh of depletion. Back in the village, the first priority for many would be an attempt to wash off the day's accumulated grime. This wouldn't be a luxurious bath. It might be a quick, shivery dip in a nearby canal, if one was accessible and permitted, or more likely, a splashdown with a basin of water carefully conserved. The feeling of scrubbing away the layers of dust, sweat, and limestone grit must have been a small, significant relief, a brief moment of feeling almost human again. Then came the evening meal, a repeat of the midday fare, more coarse bread, perhaps some stewed lentils or vegetables, a bit of fish or fowl if you were in a more privileged gang or had something to trade, and of course the essential ration of beer. It was eaten quickly, without ceremony, the primary goal being to refuel the depleted body. Accidents and injuries were, naturally, an ever-present shadow. A moment's inattention, a misstep, a falling stone, a snapping rope, disaster could strike in an instant. We know from skeletal remains that these workers suffered. Crushed bones, twisted spines, debilitating arthritis were common. Medical treatment, as mentioned, was pragmatic. They set bones, stitched wounds with needles and sinew, used honey as an antiseptic, and had a pharmacopoeia of herbal remedies. But for a severe injury, one that rendered you incapable of work, the future was grim. You might be cared for to a point, but if you couldn't contribute, you became a burden. What then? Sent back to your home village if you were a conscript, or simply left to the charity of your comrades or family if any were near? The thought must have been a constant, unspoken fear. As night fell over the workers' city, a relative quiet would descend, broken only by the murmur of voices, the occasional cough, the distant sounds of animals. You would collapse onto your reed mat, every muscle screaming in protest, your mind numb with fatigue, knowing that in just a few short hours, the cycle would begin anew. The sounds of the night in the village, a collective murmur of exhaustion, might have blended with the chirping of crickets, perhaps a gentle breeze whispering through the huts, a sound almost like the soft patter of distant rain, lulling you finally into a troubled, fleeting sleep. But why? Why all this sun-baked agony, this monumental, back-breaking effort, this sacrifice of countless lives and untold man-hours? The answer, like the pyramids themselves, is complex and multi-layered, rooted deeply in the ancient Egyptian worldview. At the apex of it all was the pharaoh, not merely a king, but a divine or semi-divine being, a god incarnate on earth. He was the intermediary between the gods and humanity, responsible for maintaining Ma'at, the ancient Egyptian concept of order, balance, truth, and cosmic harmony. If Ma'at was upheld, Egypt would prosper, the Nile would flood predictably, the harvests would be bountiful, and chaos, or Isfet, would be kept at bay. The pyramid was far more than just a tomb. It was a resurrection machine, an architectural catalyst designed to ensure the pharaoh's successful journey into the afterlife, where he would join the sun god Ra on his eternal voyage across the sky, or become Osiris, king of the underworld. By ensuring his own immortality, the pharaoh also ensured the continuation of Ma'at and thus the well-being of the entire land of Egypt. His successful transition to godhood was a matter of national, even cosmic, importance. Did you, the average stone hauler, covered in dust and nursing your rope burns, deeply ponder these theological intricacies every day? Perhaps not in explicit terms. Your motivations might have been more immediate: the daily ration of bread and beer, the obligation of corvée labor, the fear of the overseer's lash, or perhaps a genuine ingrained belief in the divine order that the pharaoh represented. It's hard to say, but the ideology was pervasive, reinforced by priests, by officials, by the very scale and permanence of the monuments themselves. The construction of a pyramid was a national project, a colossal undertaking that mobilized vast resources: stone, timber, food, and of course, human labor from all corners of the kingdom. It was a powerful statement of the pharaoh's authority, his ability to command and organize, a tangible symbol of the unified state. The sheer logistical challenge of quarrying, transporting, and assembling millions of tons of stone with relatively primitive technology is mind-boggling even today. So, while you toiled under that brutal sun, your individual suffering was, in the grand narrative, subsumed into this divine purpose, this monumental effort to secure eternity for your God-King and, by extension, stability and prosperity for the land you inhabited. A grand concept certainly, though perhaps a cold comfort when your back was breaking. A common misconception, fueled by dramatic Hollywood epics and perhaps a misreading of Herodotus, is that the pyramids were built entirely by vast armies of brutally oppressed slaves, whipped mercilessly until they dropped. While it's true that ancient Egypt, like most ancient societies, practiced slavery, captives of war or those condemned for crimes might well have ended up in forced labor, perhaps in the harshest quarries or mines. The consensus among modern Egyptologists is that the primary workforce for the great pyramids of the Old Kingdom, like those at Giza, was composed largely of conscripted Egyptian peasants and a core of skilled permanent workers. Many of these were farmers, drafted into service during the Akhet, the season of the Nile's inundation, when the floodwaters covered their fields, making agricultural work impossible for about 3 to 4 months of the year. These men were available for other state projects. This was a form of corvée labor, essentially a tax paid in work rather than goods. They would be organized into gangs, often based on their home villages or districts, and would serve for a period before being rotated out and replaced by fresh crews. Alongside these seasonal conscripts was a permanent, skilled workforce: the masons, carpenters, toolmakers, and overseers we've mentioned, who lived year-round in the purpose-built workers' cities like Hayt el-Ghurab. The evidence from these cities, such as the provision of rations, medical care, and organized cemeteries with proper burials for the workers, suggests a level of care and organization inconsistent with a purely slave-based labor system where lives were considered utterly expendable. That's not to say life was easy or that discipline wasn't harsh. It undoubtedly was. But these were valued laborers, essential to a project of supreme national importance. They were fed, housed, and their injuries treated, not necessarily out of altruism, but out of a pragmatic need to maintain a functioning workforce. So, while the work was undeniably agonizing and often performed under duress, the picture is more nuanced than simply slaves building pyramids. You, as a worker, might have been fulfilling an obligation to the state, a duty to your divine king, or simply working for the sustenance that kept you and your distant family alive. The sheer numbers involved are staggering. Estimates suggest tens of thousands of workers were active on a site like Giza at any given time, with perhaps hundreds of thousands contributing over the decades it took to complete a single large pyramid, a complex, organized, and largely Egyptian workforce toiling for reasons that blended obligation, belief, and basic survival. The construction of a single great pyramid like Khufu's at Giza was not a project of years but of decades. It might take 20 to 30 years or even longer from the initial leveling of the site to the placement of the final capstone and the intricate finishing of the casing. This means that for many of the workers, especially the skilled permanent ones, pyramid building wasn't just a job, it was a significant portion of their entire working life. You might have started as a water boy, graduated to a hauling gang, perhaps if you showed aptitude and survived, become a more skilled stone dresser or mason. You could have spent your youth, your prime, and your middle age laboring on one single colossal monument. Or you might have worked on several, as pharaohs succeeded one another and new monumental projects were initiated. Imagine the sheer, almost geological timescale of it from your perspective. You would see the pyramid rise with agonizing slowness, layer by massive layer, year after painstaking year. The ramp you toiled up would grow longer and higher. The landscape around you would be perpetually transformed by quarries, work camps, and the ever-present dust of construction. There must have been a strange sense of being a tiny, almost insignificant part of something unimaginably vast and enduring. Did it inspire awe, or just a weary resignation to the endlessness of the task? As the main structure neared completion, a new phase of work would begin, the application and finishing of the outer casing stones. These were typically made of fine, white limestone from Tura across the Nile, or sometimes granite for the lower courses. These stones were cut and fitted with incredible precision, so fine that a knife blade often couldn't fit between them. This highly skilled work was done from the top down. As the pyramid reached its full height and the pyramidion, or capstone dais, was put in place, the massive construction ramps would begin to be dismantled. Working from scaffolding or directly on the steep face of the pyramid, masons would polish the casing stones to a brilliant, smooth gleam, making the entire structure shine dazzlingly in the Egyptian sun. What did it feel like for one who had hauled the rough core blocks for years to see that final polished edifice, a perfect gleaming mountain of stone? Was there a sense of pride, of shared accomplishment, or just profound relief that this particular monumental agony was drawing to a close? And then the sobering knowledge that the cycle would likely begin again for another pharaoh, another tomb, another testament to eternity, built upon the foundation of countless moments of human toil. The legacy, of course, is undeniable. These structures have defied millennia, silent witnesses to the incredible sun-baked, often brutal effort that raised them. Like the slow, inexorable erosion of mountains by wind and rain over eons, The creation of these artificial mountains was an act of immense, persistent, and collective human will. And so, our journey into the sun-baked agony of ancient Egyptian pyramid building draws to a close. We've walked the dusty paths from the workers' village, felt the imagined strain of the ropes, the oppressive heat of the desert sun, the grit of limestone dust in our mouths. It's a world so vastly different from our own, a testament to what human beings can endure and achieve when driven by belief, by obligation, or simply by the need to survive. The pyramids stand today, majestic and enigmatic, their smooth sides, now mostly stripped of their gleaming casing stones, still whispering tales of the incredible effort poured into their creation. They are monuments not just to pharaohs, but to the countless, nameless individuals whose sweat and toil raised them from the desert floor, inch by agonizing inch. As the gentle sound of the rain continues to whisper against your window, a soft, soothing counterpoint to those ancient, sun-drenched labors, let the immense weight of that historical effort, the endless days under the Egyptian sun, the sheer, mind-numbing repetition of it all, gently press you down into your own well-deserved rest. There are no colossal stones to hold tonight, no overseer's horn to dread at dawn. There is only the quiet comfort of your bed, the gentle rhythm of your own breath, and the promise of sleep. Let the images of that distant, dusty land fade, replaced by the peaceful darkness, and allow yourself to drift. Thank you for joining us on Snooze-Worthy History for Sleep in the Rain. Sleep well.